So I'm going to be looking at sort of the legal framework around misinformation and also how you can spot misinformation. So I know in the last time I discussed this, I was bashing the penal code and saying, you know, it's embarrassing that we're relying on this 19th century piece of legislation to cover cyberbullying. But actually, when it comes to the issue of misinformation, what some of these sections really show us is that, you know, very little has changed in terms of human behavior around misinformation, and it's really only the medium that has changed. And because of that, these laws that were drafted in the late 1800s are still actually applicable today. So that's something that you can sort of reflect on. So for example, Nishan just shared about election and Hillary, right? So under section 169G, whoever with intent to affect the result of an election makes or publishes any statement purporting to be a statement of fact which is false and which he either knows or believes to be false, right? So in relation to an election, you're trying to affect the result, you say something that you know to be false, right? Or you don't think it's true. That was an offense all the way back then, right? Of course, they weren't using Twitter. They were probably, you know, sending pamphlets or spreading rumors by word of mouth, but that is an offense. Then section 465, again, this is about some kind of telegraph. This is the language that is used, but again, it's about anyone who knowingly does that to transmit a false message, either with intention to defraud, injure, annoy any person, or spread any false rumor which may be detrimental to the government or the interests of the public. So again, sort of same thing that we're talking about in terms of, you know, something about the COVID vaccine or telling people about some threat. Those sections still apply. And finally, section 485, again, whoever circulates or publishes any statement, rumor, or report which he knows to be false with the intention to cause fear or alarm to the public and thereby to induce any person to commit an offense. So for instance, Shavi shared the story about how, you know, all these rumors were going around saying that the Muslim population was becoming a threat and that they were trying to, you know, sterilize people and things like that. Obviously, that kind of information is being circulated to incite other people to discriminate against Muslims or to be hostile towards them. So you can see then how way back in the 1800s, this was sort of foreseen and very little has changed. Only the medium has changed. And then we have the Sri Lanka Telecommunications Act, which talks about how any person who sends a message which he knows to be false using this telecommunication network can be held liable for committing an offense. Okay. But what I want to pause here and talk about is that it may not actually be a good idea to have this space regulated by law, right? To have a strict law about misinformation, because as Malin shared when we are talking about privacy, sometimes it's dangerous to trust the government with the power to regulate what is true and what is false, and to actually punish people for things the government says are not true. So sometimes it can be, the laws like that can be used to strengthen state control. So you may have heard about this Dr. Li Wenliang in Wuhan, China, who early on sort of was trying to raise the alarm about COVID, but for too long a time, the government of China tried to suppress that, and so the information didn't get out, right? So again, that's because it paints the government in a bad light. It causes a panic, so the government thinks better if we don't let anyone know about it, and that's dangerous. But even if they don't do that all the time, what happens when you have laws like that, which allows the government to do it, is it creates what's called a chilling effect. And that means, you know, even if I have a story that might be true, if I don't have all the sources and I don't have enough evidence to back it up, because I'm worried that the government will label me as spreading misinformation, I might not share that information at all. So then people self-censor and they don't share information which could be useful. And then there is less information circulating, less ideas, and so everyone is worse off. So Singapore has been criticized. They have a law which they introduced called the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act. So it sounds really good, right? Okay, we want to protect people from online falsehoods. But somehow, according to Singapore, it's always opposition politicians who are spreading falsehoods and who are being told to take things down. Or in India, there's a lot of criticism about these new social media rules, which makes it mandatory for the big tech social media companies to comply with government orders when the government says, you know, this information is not true and has to be taken down. So when it comes to this thing about information, because information is so crucial to, as Marlene said, to a modern world, and also so crucial to making important decisions, like in elections, like knowing about how I can protect myself. It may not be a good idea for the government to be able to just come and regulate what they consider is true and false. So what can you do to spot misinformation, right? So first is this thing about looking at sources, right? So first of all, is it a reputed news source? So that's a good rule of thumb, that if it comes from a reputed news source, there are lots of checks and balances which make those news sources have to double and triple check, right? Because if they share a story that is not true, like if CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera share a piece of a new story that isn't true, they could get in a lot of trouble and it hurts their reputation. But for example, if Hiru Gossip or some other gossip page shares something, it doesn't really hurt their reputation, right? Because they are not some credible news source that won't affect their financial stream. In fact, it may help it. So that's a good way to look at it. But also it's about where is the source coming from. So on your groups, you'll always have that one person who forwards anything that they come across. So you know if something comes from there, it may not be vetted, it might not be reliable. The second thing you can look for is there are some errors, right? So there will be poor formatting, poor grammar or spelling, typos. You know, you get these WhatsApp forwards that have emojis in them along with information. So when you see something like that, that should immediately raise some red flags that this might not be true. Then of course, there are what I call deja vu stories, right? So there are some really famous ones that keep coming around from time to time. So you may have heard about this HIV one, that some boy went to a movie and then when he sat in his seat, he felt a prick and then there was a needle there and a note that said, welcome to the world of HIV. And supposedly there's this conspiracy in which people were being deliberately infected with AIDS, right, in movie theaters. So that one has turned up numerous times and it's completely false, right? Last two things are about emotion. So one is you need to ask yourself when you read a story, how does it make you feel? Because especially when it comes to disinformation, which Nishan talked to you about, if I am trying to swing an election, I'm not likely to say something like, oh, this person said some bad words when he was a politician. They're probably going to say something really offensive, like maybe he sexually harassed someone, or maybe they have some secret agreement with terrorists or something like that, that gets you really angry, because that's what's going to make you make a really, like completely change your mind about a decision like an election. So if a news story is deliberately sort of working on your emotions, then that should also raise red flags and you should ask yourself, is there something that needs to be fact checked about this? And of course, finally, Marlene talked about this a little, you have to take the trouble to read. So sometimes you'll see one of those clickbait headlines that says that, you know, someone said something rude or something like that. And only if you read the full article will you understand the full picture, right? So you might pass a story that says, you know, 3 Israeli children killed by Palestinian bombing. But if you read the full story, you might find that like 100 Palestinian children were killed, right? So something like that. So make sure you take the time to read. So I have here some examples of these stories, right? So this is that suspicious WhatsApp forward, right? So there are grammar errors, there are those emojis, please pass this immediately, forwarding as received, things like that. And then this is another one which said that some Nobel Prize winner confirmed that people who get vaccines have no chance of survival. So it seems credible on the at first glance, because they've posted links that seem to be backing it up, right? But first of all, you know, here you'll see that they call him a scientific genius, right? Like a reputed news source isn't going to call even a Nobel Prize winner a scientific genius. That sounds a little childish, right? But also the links that they've sent, well, one of the links is just a Wikipedia link to that famous scientist, which obviously is likely to have. And then you have a link that's a 4chan link, and then something called streamable.com, right? So not exactly the most reliable sources. And actually, if you go and click those links, you'll find, okay, that's really not what the story is. So someone has just posted links and posted like a completely random story along with it. So remember those things when you think about, you know, what can I do to spot misinformation? How can I prevent myself from falling prey to misinformation? Look for those signs. And that's it.
ඔයාලා නිකන් තේරෙනවද මේ අර island first වගේ විභාගයක island first වගේ කියලා දාලා තියෙනවා කවුරු හරි වෙන කවුරු හරි ඇක්ටර් කෙනෙක්ගේ හරි මේ පින්තූරයක් දාලා island first සුබැතුම් මංගේ මල්ලි එහෙම දැකලා තියෙනවද?
ඔව්. ඊට පස්සේ මොකද්ද
ඒකත් misinformation
ඒ කියන්නේ tuition class master
ලංකාවේ අංක එක බිහි කරේ මම කියලා තියෙන්නේ.
tuition class
එහෙම නෙවෙයි අර ෆෝන් ඇක්ටර් කෙනෙක් වගේ දාලා
this is to make fun of misinformation. Yeah.